Welcome, everyone, to a joint hearing of the Senate and House Education Committees. I'm Peter Conlon, Chair of the House Education Committee. To my left is Seth Baumgartz, Chair of the Senate Education Committee. Today, we are getting a report from the School Redistricting Task Force. And really, it's an opportunity for us to sort of hear their thought process, what's in the report, and ask some questions. We have until the House floor time, which is at 3, so probably a few minutes before that, we'll have to break. But I think probably the best thing that we should do is dive right in. And I think the two chairs of the Redistricting Task Force are going to open things. And welcome to you both. If you'd all just introduce yourselves and we'll get started. And thank you for your work and producing a comprehensive product for the legislature, as well as for being here today.
Thank you for having us, Chair Conlon and Chair Baumgartz. It's great to be here. I am Senator Martina Rock-Ulick. I serve as Vice Chair of Health and Welfare, and I'm on Senate Finance that I'm missing right now, but I have permission to be here, so thank you.
Representative Edie Granning from Jericho, representing Jericho and Underhill, Vice Chair of House Commerce and Economic Development, and Martina and I co-chaired the task force. And with us here today,
Jade Adams. I'm a retired superintendent. I'm a resident of Stratford, Vermont, and I was a member of the task force as well.
I will get us started. I will sort of set the table with a little bit of history and how we did the work. And then I'll pass it over to Representative Granning, who will go through the 41 pages of the general portion of the report. And then Dr. Badams will talk about the Appendix E, which is the actual proposal that the task force has put forth. Does that sound okay?
That sounds great. Thank you.
And I would also just like to say that if anyone would like to interrupt with a question, I'm happy to entertain questions as I go, and I'm sure my colleagues are as well.
I think what we'll do is if people have clarifying questions during the presentation, please jump in. But for sort of broader questions, let's save those to the end.
Okay. So as you all know, we were formed as part of Act 73. If you look at the bill, we are specifically conjured up in page 18, starts on page 18, and it goes through to page 24. And if you haven't read those pages, I would certainly welcome you to do that. I think it's very helpful. We were created specifically given the charge. There is created the School District Districting Task Force to recommend new school district boundaries and configurations to the General Assembly. So create new district boundaries and configurations. I think you all know that we had some members appointed, legislative members appointed, 3 from the House and 3 from the Senate. We had some retired superintendents, a business manager, a former school board member, as well as an appointee by the governor who was a former superintendent. And we were Secretary of Education. Right, and Secretary of Education as well. Thank you. So we ended up having a group that was actually quite well versed in education, had an interesting background in the state of Vermont and outside of the state of Vermont, and different areas of expertise. We also came from all different parts of the state. So we felt like we were quite well represented, had a well-informed group to do the work. I would love it if I could read a little bit about what we had to do in terms of Act 73, creating these boundaries, but I like to read the list of qualifiers, and if you would allow me to do that, I would like to do that. So we were told to draw up these maps, and we were also told to get public input from Vermonters, which we did. We worked with the commission on the future of public education with a survey that was sent out to many folks, and we had a great response to that. We had public input at all of our meetings, which was both in person, but also submitted in writing. And then we were also told that we had to have 2 public hearings. We ended up having 4. And we tried to sort of spread those out across the state as well. And I think it's also important to note that Representative Branning and I also spent time traveling around the state, meeting with folks, talking to folks, superintendents. Senator Harrison asked me to come down to Brattleboro, which I did. And she asked me to drive the streets and the roads around that rural part of the state so that I could really get a feel for what our students experience on a regular basis. I live in Burlington, so for me, it was great to drive some, what I would call must be dangerous roads in the winter. They were dangerous in the summer, but I can imagine in the winter they're worse. So we were told to try to put together districts that were between 4,000 and 8,000 students. We were to look at both school districts, proposed new school districts or supervisory unions that had to have a grand list and pupil count balanced number. They had to be demographically equitable, logistically feasible, and create the least amount of disruption to students as possible. We had to, when creating the districts, the task force shall consider the following with the goal of increasing equitable access to education opportunity for all students. So equity obviously was one of the first and foremost pieces of the work that we were doing. Current school district and town boundaries and other historic and current community connections, including access to regional services for students, such as designated areas, had to be considered. We had to look at geographic barriers, including mountains and rivers. We had to look at population distribution. We had to look at the location, the capacity, and the facility condition index score of current school buildings. We had to consider transportation and employment patterns and practices, grand list values, accounting for the homestead exemption and current education spending. We had to look at student demographics. We had to look at debt, liabilities, assets of current school districts. We had to look at staffing levels and salary scales. And we had to look at opportunities to support small, I'm going to use the word small, it says local elementary schools, central middle schools, and regional high schools with the least disruption to students. We had to consider access to career and technical education. We had to maximize cost efficiencies. We were asked to consider the location of schools and CTE centers and any other factors that we deemed relevant. So to say that it was a challenging task, I think would be an understatement. I think we certainly agree with the governor that reform is desperately needed, and we did end up providing that. That will be brought forward a little bit later. But that was the context in which we were doing the work.
Over the course of 4 months and 8 weeks.
Right. We started by taking all of this information that I just shared with you and listening to Vermonters, and we had the help of a great facilitator named Sue McCormick and her group, which is called the Creative Discourse Group. And they really helped us take all of what I just read to you and come up with some very deliberate intentions for the work that we were doing, as well as some goals. Because as much as there was a lot dictated here, there was some stuff that was not dictated. Like, what do we do with the public input? That's not explicit in the law. So we set an intention, we set goals. We decided right off the bat, we didn't want to do harm to our communities in Vermont, especially our rural communities. We wanted to focus on equity, we wanted to focus on quality, and we wanted to focus on cost. So those were sort of our guiding principles, and everything that we did came from those. So we started by looking at what would it be like to have one school district in the state of Vermont. We wanted to draw maps. We had every intention of drawing maps. So we did that as an exercise, and we quickly discovered that having one district in the state of Vermont certainly did not adhere to that list of qualifiers that I just read to you. And also, we have some really interesting aspects to our landscape, which is the state school districts. And that immediately sort of made one district impossible in more than one way. We then, actually, Dr. Battens, I think, drew up a really interesting map that would have divided us by grand list value. Right?
It's true, yeah.
And it ended up with a third of the state versus 2/3 of the state, right, basically. So that was, again, didn't adhere to what we were charged with. We then looked at, I know Rep. Branning and I were really interested in a regional high school map. We thought it would be great to really start with regional high schools and then build districts around those high schools. That became challenging for a number of reasons. One, we needed way more information when it came to transportation. We felt that without money available for school construction, that was kind of a non-starter. And this is something that I would say we bumped up on again and again. We weren't charged with dealing with governance. So when we looked at creating these larger regional high school areas, what seemed to happen was that we were going to start increasing choice, especially in our comprehensive CTEs in high school. Yes, comprehensive high school, so they would include CTE. But we started bumping up into governance structures, and it was unclear as to whether or not we were just going to be expanding choice across the state because of the supervisory union versus district conflict. And that was not part of our mandate. It's not something that we heard Vermonters wanted us to do, and it wasn't something that we felt comfortable with. So that ended up being part of our report, but it wasn't something that we mandated as a map. Right. So then let's end up with a CTE map. The CTE map held a lot of promise for us. We were pretty excited about it because obviously everybody wants CTE to be expanded in the state of Vermont. That had its issues, one being that CTE is not equitably distributed across the state. We all know that. Seems like it was done rather haphazardly. Also, programming in our CTEs is not equitable. And ultimately, we also decided that the map, if you all have taken a look at it, and if you haven't, you should, was not equitable in that one of the districts, Chittenden County, had over 21,000 students in it. And then there was another map of a district that had a little over 2,000. So those sizes just created a real equity issue. And we heard from a lot of folks who had issues with that piece of that map, just being inequitable in terms of size. So simultaneously, I think we were discovering that there was a lot of savings to be had by regionalizing services. I was just at a press conference talking about healthcare and how when you buy in bulk, you save money. So Dr. Battens will be talking about that a little bit later. We also wanted to continue with the idea of, merging some districts, but doing it strategically and not doing it as this large scale mandate, which Dr. Battens will talk about would be very problematic in many ways. So yeah, we ended with the last month, I would say, of our 4-month foray was putting together the report, which we did with the help of the Creative Discourse Group. And ultimately, we voted against the CTE map. I believe it was 7-3 because of the issues that I mentioned before. And I think I can probably turn it over to Representative Frank. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, thanks, everybody. I just want to highlight a couple of things that Senator Hewitt said, and then I'm gonna not repeat it. So just bear with me for a moment. I just want to highlight the people that were on the task force. We had 2 former secretaries of education. We had 1 former state board of education member. We have 2 retired superintendents from different parts of the state. We have a pseudo-retired business manager, school board members, teachers. These are people steeped in education at lots of different levels and asked interesting and important questions every time we went through all of these people who are dedicated their lives to education. So thank you for putting that group to be able to come together. Thank you to the governor and to the committee on committees and to the speaker for choosing the people that were chosen, because it was an amazing group of people and we got more done than I even believed we could. I'm the one who keeps saying we only had 4 months, we only had 4 months, and I will probably say that a couple of more times because it was not enough time. Was enough time to figure out, and data. We requested a lot of data from the agency. We got most of it. We didn't get all of it. We got most of it 2 months in. So we had roughly 2 months. And if you take the last 3 weeks that we were working on the report, we had about 5 weeks to really work with that data. And we had to figure out how to make it all work together. So we have created for you a treasure trove of really important data that I hope you can use because it's there now and it's available, almost everything that we asked for. So hoping maybe we'll get some more. But that should help you because you now have the really hard task of what's next. So what else I want to say? Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say, so folks who are saying that, the fact that we didn't produce maps is setting us back 2 months. I would just say we have now co-located a bunch of data for folks if they want to continue with the map process. If we were told to do it in 3 months, you all can do so if you would like, but there's a lot of great information in our report that could assist anyone who is interested in that. We are here till May or June. So, just throwing that out there. I know that is a critique that I have heard a few times.
I'll say a couple of things. I'll say one of the things that we learned that's really important is that there has to be a partnership. And it has to be a partnership with the legislature and the agency and the Superintendent's Association and the School Boards Association. And we've started having a lot of those conversations. But this can't be done adversarially if we want it to be successful. And our kids and their education is worth it. So full stop, that has to be a focus. These community, it's not the right word, collaborative, gosh, I'm now in, thank you, collaborative education service agency. Can do a lot to save money and to make availability of opportunity for students more equitable across the state. And I hope that you're open to learning more about them and to understanding how they can work in Vermont. They work really well in regional states across the country. We're slow to this party. We passed it just a couple of years ago, a system for this. We would have to change that law to make it work in the system that we've put forward. But it's going to be an amazing tool for our state. I think I'm going to let you talk about all of the things.
All the things.
All the things.
Thank you. Thanks.
Actually, pause for a minute. Just wanted to see if there's sort of any questions about with the opening comments before we dive into the proposal. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I first appreciate the invitation and also being involved with the task force. And it was less than a year ago that I was invited to come and talk about my own experiences as a superintendent in Pennsylvania, consolidating schools. And at that meeting, I shared the exhaustive process that we went through in dealing with the $26 million budgetary shortfall and $180 million budget, and seeing that consolidation was probably going to be part of that, but knowing how difficult it would be, we held that up for 3 years. We downsized, we studied our organization, we did a just so much work in the 2 years leading up to the consolidation, that we had all of the data, and we had extensive studies, and we had extensive public engagement before we shocked the system by closing a significant number of schools. I say all that in response to the notion that our recommendation is being seen sort of an act of defiance. I'd say it's very much to the contrary, that it was a result of a lot of very condensed research. It was the result of a very probably too quick data analysis, and the 160 plus pages that you see in the report are just that. It's a thorough report based on research that you can look at, you can question, and you can make your conclusions. That's in reaction to a proposal that I still would say we have not heard all that we need to hear about. Why 5 districts, the original proposal. And given all that we've learned about how consolidation saves money or does not save money, I think there are some very serious questions that came up in that research that makes me very worried that if we jump to a massive consolidation, which means school closures, which means increased class sizes, which means loss of local control, means all 3 of those things for sure. I don't care. I'll argue that with anyone. Sell that to your voters. It doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat. We heard loud and clear in the public meetings we had that nobody liked the idea of forced consolidation, period. That means we haven't done a good job selling them. And we aren't in a position to sell them because we don't know. There's nobody here that knows whether consolidating will actually save money. And listening to the governor in the last couple of days, it's obvious to me that saving money is the #1 goal here. And so if we put our state and our communities and our towns through this level of disruption, and we don't save them money, a lot of money, and reduce their taxes, I'm just glad I'm not running for office. So that said, that was our motivation for coming up with the alternative proposal that we did. Realizing that there definitely are places where we have redundancy. We identified through our attempts to do maps that we have areas where there's no service for career and tech center. We found that it's really difficult. We use the standard of a 30-minute drive in the mapping that we did as a team. And we found places where it just wasn't feasible to have access to a career tech center or to a comprehensive high school in 30 minutes. And so there is no doubt, as Senator Hewlett mentioned in her comments, there's no doubt that we have a need for construction. And going back to my testimony a year ago, where do you put, if we need more career and tech centers, where should they go? That requires study. We can look at our maps now and see where those deserts are. We can see the areas where none of the colored pathways to the 30-minute drive or the 45-minute drive are there, just blank space. So you can't just throw a dart at the map and decide where to put a CTE center. It takes study. And so it became pretty clear to me after our first public meeting when we met at Leland and Gray High School that there was a lot more work to be done. We tried to do that, right? We did a lot of the research. And the best we came up with were promising practices that we learned in different regions, one of which was in the southeast area of Vermont, where they are using a cooperative educational services model that they've grown themselves. As a former superintendent in that region, I know what they went through consulting with some folks in Massachusetts who are running those sorts of organizations. And then also coming from Pennsylvania, where we had an extensive, it's called the intermediate unit system there, that serves really a one-stop shop to consolidate costs, education costs for things like low incidence special education needs. They do back office stuff like billing for Medicaid. And then really on top of everything else, professional development. So rollout, when the state Department of Education in Pennsylvania would roll out a literacy initiative, every single SU wasn't responsible for figuring out how to adopt that themselves. The intermediate unit served as a regional hub where they could train the trainers to send people back to be on the same page in terms of literacy instruction. So,
I just want to jump in here. One of the areas that we noted where we are spending more than we should, right? Where there is a way to save money is in this, how we roll programs out in the state, how we train teachers. And I just want to highlight this because this is really important. We are so inconsistent in what's happening across the state. And this was clear, this has been made clear to us. I'm sure it's been made clear to you over and over again. But if the Agency of Education is actually staffed well with highly qualified people and can roll out programs across the state in a way that is with fidelity and consistency, we won't have every single school district trying to do it on their own and coming up with some different program. There's going to be some nuance, something different, some way that they do it. But they all spent all the same amount of time. So how many? 119 school districts are going to do that over and over again versus one, giving everybody the information. Like there are things like that that were made very clear to us that we can do. And we can do it regionally, or we can do it centrally. So.
And without blaming the individuals who work at the Agency of Education, that's an organization that I think is woefully understaffed. Especially given the breadth of responsibility they have. And we had a presentation from someone who was new to the agency, who I don't think really had experienced what we as superintendents in the field experienced the previous year. There was a statement made that the data is great. The data that the agency has and their ability to gather and use data is perfect. For some words close to that. And looking around the room, there were other superintendents in the audience and so forth. What we went through to try to just report our student enrollment numbers in the wake of Act 127, so they're critical to make sure we get our tax rates right. It took us months in my district, and I know it was the same for many of my peers, just to get the data to go into the system and come out correctly. To the point where I had to get on the phone with one of the people working in data in the AOE and just tell them from a handwritten list the numbers of students we had in each grade. And that's after they've been submitted through these electronic systems. Ultimately, it came down to some third-party vendor that we had hired to help with this process, but just the statement that our data collection is fine was just patently not accurate. And subsequent to that, we had a presentation from the secretary telling us that we as a committee or task force need not worry about implementation. Yet you heard Senator Gulick run through the list of things we were told we had to consider in developing our proposal. I don't know what else to say about that. That we didn't have to consider implementation. If we just needed to draw a map, we could have just gone with counties. We could have had a competition among kindergartners to draw pretty lines on a map, whatever. Implementation is critical in this state. We ran into the issue that we had 20,000 some students in the Chittenden County area in a number of schools who are all being educated in districts that are already at scale. We had a lovely meeting in Winooski, where we hosted a public meeting where they've got a campus that's got their kindergarten through 12th graders on a campus. It's running fine. And here we are, we're worrying now, thinking they're gonna have to consolidate, they're gonna have to join somebody else, and they're already at scale. Burlington is already at scale. Several of the districts up there are already functioning efficiently and at scale. But if you go to other areas, like right here in the capital region, where we have, if you look at the declining enrollment, you look at the number of schools you're still operating, you've got plenty of room to consolidate high schools. So if we're just going to do a blanket proposal that applies to the entire state, we're not going to fix our problems. We're going to exacerbate our problems. And we're going to put communities through a lot of turmoil. People in my own town in Stratford right now have signs out, they're printing lawn signs, and when they start printing lawn signs, you know what's on their mind. And it's essentially saying, fix our taxes, don't mess with our schools, essentially is what the sign says. So cooperative educational services, we thought, was one initial step we could do to save money. And it's not gonna be dramatic, certainly not when you're starting anything out. But in comparison to the costs that you're gonna face when we try to implement a drastic 5-8 district consolidation plan, how are you gonna handle the teacher salaries? And how are you gonna handle all the teacher agreements that are gonna be leveled? They're not gonna level down. Just that cost alone, what's that gonna look like? Health insurance costs aren't gonna change. Same number of bodies are gonna be insured, just in different number of SUs. And then politically, right out of the gate, maybe after our first meeting, we might not even had our first meeting yet. There is an argument to be made that more effective governance and less expensive governance might occur if we had supervisory districts instead of supervisory unions. That way, everyone would have to participate in whatever reform you're gonna do. Immediately, there was pushback from people who love their SAUs for the very fact they have more independence in governance. And we started hearing from different members of our own committee that they were being pressed to make sure you don't mess with the SUs. So that's your backdrop. So it seemed to us that cooperative educational services was something that was like, third rails, offered actual savings, had research backing showing that in all the other states that use them, and most of the rural states do, except us, they're working effectively, they're audited, it's not guesswork, and it's not hypothetical. And it's already kind of homegrown, starting up in our own state. So that was one piece of the pie. The other thing we learned in visiting all the different regions was that there were already efforts underway to consolidate where it made sense for districts. And we were hearing that too from our folks locally saying, hey, put us with this district if you're going to consolidate us, or do this or do that. And then there were actually places where they got even further down the road and they were actually meeting with each other. And at one point I was asked to attend a meeting of the White River Valley SU. And at that meeting, the Orange Southeast or Orange, one of the Orange SUs, had asked to participate in that meeting, and they joined because they wanted to find out if White River Valley SU would be interested in consolidating with them potentially. Later, we heard that Woodstock and Hartford and Windsor were talking about shared services and an opportunity to realize some consolidation. So, some of that was because they felt that if they didn't do it themselves, it was going to be done to them because of this work in Act 73. But they had some really good ideas. And there's a danger, if you just let everybody team up on their own, there's a danger that it's going to be like picking teams in gym class when you were in elementary school. Where I'm going to go seek a district like mine that's functioning as well as I think my own is, or mine's going to be more socially homogeneous or whatever. So there need to be
Or that district
justifications.
doesn't spend as much money as my district does
Yeah.
on student learning.
Right.
So they have so much farther to come along to where my district is, that why do I want to take everybody through that, right? Like,
Right.
This has to be done in a way, sorry, I'm totally
Oh,
wrong, but this
no,
has
no.
to be done in a way that is studied, that there is leadership, that we build that consensus in advance, that this is gonna be better for everyone, and we understand why we need trust. Right, this is the thing that we kept hitting our heads against, is that there is no trust right now. And if we don't build that trust across the state in a way that is, well, it's slow, right? I didn't say this before, I'm in a district that merged. I've been involved in merging districts for 15 years. We started 15 years ago, we finished in 2018, I think it was, so I don't know how long ago that was. It was a long time. It was 6-ish years from the beginning of our first conversations to our final lawsuit being settled. And, right, And we had a district that had a shared high school for almost 50 years before that. It was a supervisory. It took that long to merge. There was some trust, but not enough. So that's why this is so important. This needs to be done methodically. This needs to be done carefully. This needs to be done with a really clear understanding of who is being asked to merge with who and what those difficulties will be when they come together and how do we support them through it. And without those supports, it can't be successful. And what happens if it's not successful? We're teaching kids or we're not teaching kids. And that's why we have to do this really carefully and really well.
I just want to, before we start, question, are you wrapped up with your presentation? I didn't want to stop it.
I'm limited, I can stop. I had the third point that I would have made.
And then we'll take questions.
Okay, all right. So we came to cooperative educational services as one lead in, and then voluntary mergers. So essentially voluntary mergers that would be subject to scrutiny of whether it's the AOE or the state board, whatever it would be. But they would need to meet certain criteria. They would have to show that they're going to make more efficient use of resources, saving money at some point, lead to better educational outcomes. And we can build criteria. And then we also thought about incentives. We're talking now about trying to restore some kind of building construction aid. It's going to be necessary. We can keep on turning our head as this will pass the graveyard on this one, but we have buildings that are collapsing, buildings that are in need of where it'd be way cheaper to bulldoze and build new than to renovate. And that's not going to go away. So we thought an incentive that if you're going to create a comprehensive high school in an area, that if we could get a merger out of that, and then also get a better facility with better access to career and tech, that would be an incentive to do this kind of work. And so that was the second part of the proposal. And then finally, we couldn't help but bump into a couple of other familiar third rails in discussing anything when it comes to school reform. But we visited some regions where school choice is absolutely essential because there's not a public school within a drive or within a reasonable drive. And others where there are public schools with capacity that still have choice. And we were told by a number of people who came to these meetings that if you touch choice, we moved here for choice, so we will leave if we don't have school choice. And we just need to decide. I had people write to me to tell me that any comments I had made about choice were not accurate, that in fact there's no competition between independent schools and public schools, and that independent schools actually save the public system money. Well, in my town, because we analyzed all this data, the high school that is within 30-minute drive of my, actually I have two high schools within, four high schools within a 30-minute drive of my home. And a lot of kids go to all of them. And there's choice in my town, which I still, I'd still love to see a financial analysis, but there are over 100 empty seats at White River Valley SU High School. And there are about 100, 150 kids that go to another independent school, same distance. That means there are two principals. In essence, if you have a school head and then some other administrator, you might have the equivalent of two superintendents. You have certainly redundant teachers when you look at class sizes at both of the institutions. And so at least in my town, it's absurd to think that that choice is coming without a cost. And so until we can get honest about the economics of choice, if we want to be the choice state, we have to be willing to pay for it. And so this notion that we're going to save money somehow because of choice is ridiculous. I'll beg to be corrected on that, but that's my just very, very simplistic assessment of it. We also have situations where we're designating every single child a career and tech student at an independent school receiving public money, which makes me wonder, would it make sense for, well, no longer a superintendent, but had I known that that was possible, I might do that for my high school. And what would the impact cost be for the system then? And those are just some things that we have to be, before we just say public education spending is out of control. and faulting the schools when much of that really becomes apparent just because of the imposition of the new student weights. I see implementation of Act 73 as written right now is really dangerous. And I would stop.
Senator Heffernan.
I have to leave in a little bit. That's why I was so eager to ask. So I want to thank you for the work you've done. Unfortunately, you didn't do what was charged as far as doing a map. What I did hear is that you did look at one district. Now, I'm a fan of one or two districts right down the Green Mountain myself. What this will help do, I believe, is that we don't rush to combine schools, but take the time and where it can be done effectively, do it, leave school choice open, and we will get to where we need to be. We're definitely wasting money, as you see, in other services, in duplication of superintendents. So I appreciate the work, but it's like you could have done a map of two and said, hey, this is where we're going to save. It might not work. We can't move as fast as the governor wants to move. But when it comes time to start consolidating, the locals will have a lot more input because you're all under one district. We don't have to worry about who's buying out what or what teachers, and it can be done at the local level as well. If we're worried about, school boards, we should think about having advisory boards at each school that have some say on what happens with their money. Totally change the way we're doing things to help save Vermonters, because 87% of Vermonters say they're paying way too high a property tax. And we have to do something with their school system.
Do you have a question for?
And that was more of a statement, but I want to thank them for what they did. But the question is why, we could have done two maps and then just picked it apart that way rather than saying we did no maps and are doing this suggestion. And that was kind of the question. But I do appreciate and see the work you've done. It's hard work, and like you said, not enough time.
Steve, I think we might all want to respond briefly to this comment.
Yeah, I just want to say, I hope you'll take the time to read the Appendix E. I think that is where you're going to get the detail that is a little bit missing in your question statement on where there is or isn't money to be saved. So I think taking a little bit of time with that is going to be important. I think one of the issues that we all face, and again, I am a merger advocate. I think that they're important. I think that there are places for them. I fought for them. I was one of the people who drove with 200 square miles in the school district, edge to edge, to meet with groups of people, to build that trust, to build what we needed to do to make it happen, right? That was really important to me. And we have a better school district, and we have some of the best outcomes in the state. So I would be concerned. I was concerned, I still am concerned with putting a map on the table that doesn't have buy-in from the people who are going to be impacted by people, some people here heard. I was yelled at, I was spit on, I was berated at public meetings because I'm the face of this task force that is talking about merging schools. Not because I said your school has to merge. So I think that the vehemence against it across the state will be surprising.
Can I just surprise and Jay, then I'll cede the floor to you. But Steve, I appreciate that comment, and I appreciate the criticism because you're right. I mean, we were charged with quote unquote drawing district boundaries and new configurations and so on. We did do that. I mentioned some of the ones that we tried out. We also, I forgot to mention, we looked at a county map, which again, people really want county governance. It's something that I think as legislators, we would love to see. So it felt really good, the idea of school districts based on counties. But again, the minute we started looking at what we were charged with in terms of all those qualifiers, grand list values were right out the window. And district margins, lines were right out the window. So we did make maps. We didn't ultimately vote for them because in good conscience, we couldn't do that. And I'm not trying to be flip when I say, but if you think you can do it, do it. We've given you all the information, it's co-located, go for it. I would like to see what is possible, because we didn't think it was possible, certainly not in the limited time that we had. Sorry, Jim.
No, it's all right. I think that's always, I'm keenly sensitive to this. When we had to cut $26 million from a single year's budget, I knew the first thing we had to do was cut central office administration. You have what, roughly 52 to 54 superintendents in the state of Vermont. I was one of the highest paid, this isn't a brag, it's kind of sad now I retired and I'm feeling the pinch of no income. But I was one of the higher paid superintendents in both New Hampshire and Vermont. And I made about a teacher and a half salary. So you're not going to reduce people's taxes by getting rid of every superintendent in the state of Vermont. But I sat here a year ago and I had my coffee stain printed out copy of the SU map of Vermont, and having led a district with 13,000 kids and known my teachers, known my schools, it's possible to have a bigger district and to run it well. But if you go to 2 districts, to answer your question, you're gonna have 2 superintendents, but then you can't administer all of the special ed programs and all of think of every other piece of legislation you've written that has required us to do something, whether it's ensuring student safety with behavioral threat assessment or testing that has to happen, all the regulations around transportation and attendance and all the things that have to be done administratively. How many assistants do I get if I'm the superintendent of the eastern half of Vermont? And then with special ed, every entity is going to have an LEA present at special ed meetings where placements are being determined. So how many special education administrators are you going to hire at 6-figure salaries?
Can I have one thing, Jake? Or
Sure.
we're done, sorry.
No, that's the point I'm trying to make, is that the costs
Yeah.
to consolidate are not going to translate into tax savings. In fact, in the law itself, as written, you're going to hire a bunch of people at the AOE to facilitate the transition to these fewer districts. And I can't remember what the money that's been already appropriated or allocated for that is, but imagine their job. They're going to have to be the ones that are going to consolidate all these schools and districts. And the handful of people that were, was 4 people, maybe 4 people that are being hired to do that work. How?
And then I have to go, but to answer your question, you're like, yes, you have a superintendent, how much staffing can you have? Right now, we have 119 and 52, a total of 161 superintendents. I think each one could do it with, each district doesn't have a superintendent. Either way, there is savings there, and you will have more people, but I really didn't want to get into any argument with you.
No.
I'm just asking for answers. You're giving me some. I, again, appreciate it.
For the appendix E that you all should read, if you haven't read it, please read the part about cost drivers.
Yep.
Super important.
I thank you for your time. Sorry.
Well, I just want to say, we're not arguing, it's simply saying that those are numbers. And if we have a good handle on the numbers, you can make your own.
So, yep, I got Joshua first, but I'm going to take my own little liberty and ask a question. In your opening statement, you talked about that you really wanted to focus on equity. And I think equity is, really at the heart for many of us of what we're trying to accomplish here. Could you talk a little bit about how the proposal strives towards greater equity?
I can talk about, hopefully this will lead to that, but I was going to use the CTE map as an example of not having equity, but I'll be brief, but we heard from some folks who were very dismayed by the idea of where are our BIPOC communities focused? Where do they reside, right? Where are BIPOC communities? Well, they're most heavily found in Chittenden County. They took umbrage, they had an issue with the fact that there was this massive district being created in Chittenden County that would have the highest concentration of people of color. They would have one superintendent for 21,000 students. That access compared to 2,000 students for one superintendent is not equitable. That became a real issue of a lack of equity, just to give you an example. Yeah, and then just in terms of the sheer numbers of, families accessing a superintendent, 21,000 students versus 2,000. So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to address that directly, if you look at cooperative education service areas, you have a region that implements our laws consistent, right? And they could work together, 5 regions working with the agency together implementing our laws. So flexible pathways, right? We passed that in 2013. There are school districts in the state today that haven't figured out what software to use to track their students to make sure that their students have access to flexible pathways. If we had a region who put together information, right, this cooperative service, Northeast region, and said, this is how we're going to do it, did all the professional development, figured out what the software is, figured out what the best practice is on how to do that, ensured that was implemented across that region, we would get equity. And so it's finding ways, it is a loss of local control, for sure, but it's a loss of local control to implement better outcomes for students. And that's really important because right now we have volunteer school board members, one of them, who think that they know the best way to do it, and it's only going to work if they do it their way in their region. I'm not an educator. I don't know that. I hire a superintendent to do that. And the more school board members that we have that are able to say that and able to say, if this happens regionally, and as students have to move from district to district, because that happens, life happens, sometimes you have to move. My kid will be able to continue their learning more seamlessly than they are today, right? So that's the kind of thing that we looked at when we were talking about it.
So I may not have read the appendix E well enough to understand sort of the difference between a CESA and a BOCE. So for example, a BOCE's model is basically a fee for service, where I want this service from the cooperative model and I pay a fee in to get it. What you're describing is something that's a little more sort of governmental. Is that correct? So I mean, if I'm just curious to know.
We get to choose.
Yeah.
We get to choose how we want it to be done. What we found is that in rural areas, it makes more sense to do it this way. It makes more sense to do it based in professional development, based in shared services, ensuring that there are economies of scale and that policies are implemented with fidelity and consistency. With
the cooperative group being in charge of and responsible for implementing.
Yeah.
Representative Dobrovich, you're next.
So your charge under Act 73 is specifically to come up with 3 statewide consolidation maps. Jay, or Mr. Babinson, I apologize. When you came and testified in front of our committee last year, it was the most exciting testimony I heard. And it was because you told us how we have all the data, with the exception of where specific students live, which we can't get here in the state of Vermont, to go and get GIS software, work with a consulting group, and within a month or 2, have actual data to show us where we can build maps that showed us where we can maybe build new schools if possible, where all these things, right? So I was super excited to have you there for those reasons. The task force refused to make any maps, right? So your report repeatedly claims that large-scale consolidation lacks evidence for benefits, but wasn't the role to develop maps based on the requirements from Act 73 and the charge to the task force, not unilaterally reject the concept based on your own set of recommendations or requirements?
Can I just say that we didn't refuse to make maps? I don't know.
Did you make any maps?
Yeah, we did.
Did you present?
Let's not make this.
So I guess my question is.
I listed the maps that we made, and then I said that we did not vote for them for the reasons that I.
Weren't those maps supposed to be presented to us? That was the charge.
Well, I think it'd probably be better to work with what we have. And I think Jay is itching to respond.
Yeah, I just want to respectfully disagree with the characterization of my prior testimony in that, yes, we could, if we hired somebody who did that professionally, and we had some great support from the state in terms of creating GIS maps, we couldn't locate individual students. We had to work with data that was very difficult to work with to figure out number of enrolled students and try to guess where they live. But that's not it. I was also asked in that same conversation, how long would it take to come up with a good consolidation plan? And I said, it took me 3 years. And then I was pushed a little. And I said, if you had all that data, including that GIS data, you probably could put together a good plan in a year. I said on day one, our first task force meeting, the fact that we had 8 meetings and 4 months to do this work with all the stipulations in the law. And if you were to ask me that same question again, I'd say this should be a 10-year plan. We think we've pulled a lot of that stuff together, and there's a lot to work with here. And the only real map in there is a map of the cooperative service agency projection. But yeah, I stand by what I said at that meeting, and I still do. I think if you were to hire an education and planning architect and give them this job, you're not going to get a product for at least a year.
So the reason I brought that up is because I wasn't talking about the whole consolidation, the whole reworking of everything. I was talking about the specific charge of the maps, which the comment was about just the map, that with the information, it wouldn't take very long to make a map. The consolidation I get is not a quick thing. We never said it was in the law. We put it out for a few years to get done. So I don't mind what you produced. It would have been fine if it was the 4th thing, right? 3 maps plus this, right? So if you doubted the consolidation's effectiveness, why not advocate it through legislative changes to Act 73 during its passage or after the fact, try and make changes there rather than using the task force to override the mandate by rejecting the maps and not providing the legislature with.
I guess I'd like to keep our discussion, if you don't mind, and I appreciate you making the statement, but let's keep our focus as to what the presentation is and what the information is.
I'm trying to
before
get
us.
the why, right?
I did advocate for changing Act 73 before it was passed until I had a force for it. And then I said, I don't want to serve on the task force because I think it's an impossible job. And then I was asked again, and then I was asked again. And I said, I will do my best. And I worked every day, except for maybe 3 weeks of those 4 months on this. I thought we would have maps. I didn't know how good they would be. But if anybody questions the fidelity with which this task force worked to achieve great outcomes for the state of Vermont, I will argue with them for days because we worked really hard to get this done. And we feel really good about what we brought you. And the fact that you have data to work with now on day one is a big win and should help you to do this job going forward. I wish we could have done better.
Thank you.
Senator Hashim.
I found the answer to my question. Thank you.
There's one piece of information that we didn't touch on, if you don't mind, but I will. We didn't talk about the building costs and the cost to maintain the buildings that you have today. And so we keep talking about regional schools, regional comprehensive high schools, built in places where students don't have to travel very far. Our buildings are so old right now. The amount of money that we are spending to keep them up, the debt service on the repairs that we've already done, we are spending a giant, and I wish I had the number in front of me, I don't have it, a giant portion of our school, of our tax dollars, of our taxes on that. And so to think about, again, spending money to save money, that's one of the things that it's kind of consolidation.
The collaborative education service areas, very close to what a BOCES is, so some differences. I was an advocate and I was in favor of the BOCES, voted for the passage of the law. So I guess 2 things. That's kind of already in place. All right, so that bringing that forward really isn't much of a aha kind of thing, because it's there.
This is amazing.
But-
This is not the same.
But, so I guess my question is, you have recommended 5 areas. Is that like a mandated 5 areas, or is it a recommendation? So it'd be mandated that you would be involved in one of these, the school district would be involved in one of these 5 areas.
It's a mandate to implement the cooperative education service areas. We recommended 5, knowing that the Chittenden County area might have to be divided into 2, but yeah. So 5, 7.
And I just have a quick comment. At the beginning of a testimony today, we heard some language about, I'm glad I'm not running. And if this body uses that as a model for their decisions, that's self-preservation. That's not looking out for the education of students. And I just wanted to make that point.
I totally agree with you. And in merging the district that I did, I had people, we ended up closing a school, and I had friends stop talking to me for a year. But it was more important to do the right thing for our students and the right thing for our district. And I did it. And I think that you're exactly right. We have to figure out first what the right thing to do is. And then we have to do it in a way that makes sense for Vermont and for all the people and the students in Vermont. And that's going to be hard also.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Weeks, excuse me.
If I could, so first I'd like to thank you guys for the effort. We know how hard this is because this group was living this problem up until the spring of last year. And then essentially everyone kind of acquiesced to, well, Act 73 is the best solution we could come up with at the time. And here we are. So we fully recognize how challenging your environment was and your task was. So thank you for that. I do have a question, follow up on the BOCES model. Again, you got a different acronym, but essentially it's a BOCES model with a mandate, 5 districts. So that, in fact, from my perspective, is one map that's actually in the report. You gave us a map. It's BOCES, it's 5 districts, and I appreciate that. I think the recognition that came from that, of at least, I don't know, including that map and that concept in the report, is that we do, I think, nearly all agree that the business efficiencies of those BOCES districts, or whatever we want to call them, you've validated that there is a business model benefit from those 5 districts, and that's something we could gain some experience from and modify as necessary over time. What I struggle with is you've recognized the business efficiency, but not the leadership efficiency that comes from larger districts, smaller numbers of districts. And I'm wondering why the difference between business and leadership. And again, we're talking about superintendents and such. What in your mind was the difference between business and leadership that caused you not to accept the BOCES, CISO, whatever the new acronym is? Okay, but not the leadership portion. If you could articulate that a little bit.
I'll let the former superintendent answer that question because I'm sure he can do a better job. But just from where I stand on, sitting on a school board, superintendents have a varied job and they juggle a lot. One is, curriculum and instruction, which is super important. The other is like all of this administrative work, including, infrastructure and buildings and grounds and so on and so forth. But one of the things that I really liked about the CSOP, the Cooperative Education Service Area models, is that when you have another body or entity or person doing that administrative work, which is really not student focused or student facing, I should say, it frees up the superintendents to really focus on what needs to be done to educate kids, which is curriculum, which is instruction, which is making sure teachers are, showing up their best every day in the classroom, right? Because we know that that's what makes a big difference. So that's one of the things I love about this model. It acknowledges that those are 2 very different roles. And then, of course, you've got the cost savings of the buying in bulk, but Jay, I'm sure you might want to add to that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to this whole notion that we didn't deliver a map. And again, it wasn't work avoidance by any stretch of the imagination. We did more work to come up with that conclusion than I think we would have if we drew a map. I think, in fact, it would have been much easier. The issue, though, is governance. I remember sitting, every time we presented a map, everyone shied away from addressing the governance question. Whether we considered it out of scope for the job of just drawing a map, but we had to think about that. Here we were debating whether they're going to be SUs or SDs, and getting like just so much public feedback, whether from the rural folks or from people in Chittenden County. We're getting all this pressure around what we should and shouldn't touch. And to me, I said on numerous occasions on the record, I felt that the task force being put in this position at the beginning of this process was really putting the cart before the horse. Like, with so many of the questions that couldn't be answered to help guide us in making the maps, we had to dig up ourselves. And half of it we couldn't get till halfway through the process. So when I made the flip comment about being glad I'm not running, if I'm going to go out there without that data to back me up to say we're going to make your schools more crowded, you're going to have more crowded classrooms, you're going to be fewer schools, we're going to shut some of your schools down, and you're going to lose local control. That's what I meant. I would not want to run for office on that platform in education. So just to clarify that. So this can all be done. It just can't be done in 4 months. Whether it's thinking about leadership versus the business part of the enterprise, there are not good answers for any of it. Like, show me where the savings is by going to 5 districts. And you can't wave a magic wand and say there's not going to be this big transition. How long will we pay for the transition before we see the savings? Probably the best answer to that question is looking at the analysis of Act 46. So that's all I'm saying. It's not to belittle the work done on Act 73. That's a huge undertaking. If you think of the size of this transformation, I think it's doing everybody in this process a disservice to suggest that you can do something this big in this short of a period of time. I mean, we've got a 3-year leeway implementing, but we just do the planning is going to take more than 4 months. And
It's like,
sorry, but I feel pretty strongly.
It's not about the leadership, it's about the governance. So we have districts that operate K through 8, K through 6, not operate at all, pre-K through 12, all of those different levels. We have our academies, we have some privates that are going to continue to get money from the state. We have others that are not, but still will for the next few years. There's so many moving parts right now. It's a lot to ask a group of people to tackle in that amount of time.
I do. I appreciate that answer, and thank you. That forms it. I have a different question. A lot of your effort in the task force centered around the analysis of CTEs and such, and we all want to see a enhancement of our CTE programs. I'm wondering if in your data analysis, if you recognize that there were population centers not served by the 30-minute boundaries where CTEs were missing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It's not quite spelled out that those kinds of missing CTEs isn't really called out that I saw in my review of the report. Just wondering if at some point we can identify, well, in those, again, this has to be a population that can utilize a new CTE, but I'm wondering where those CTEs might be for future planning purposes. That's
Ideally, it's part of a comprehensive high school where all students belong to the same unit and they don't have to leave that unit to go to CTE. Ideally, right? If we're looking at where those should be.
Let me reframe the question. So we have existing CTEs and those aren't going to get up and go anywhere. So we have those and we're trying our best to enhance those. I'm just wondering, without having to build an entirely new CTE regional comprehensive school, where are the missing CTEs now? That's kind of
I can
It's really, excuse me, Senator Weeks. It's really complicated by the rural nature of our state and the transportation times. And there is, in the southwestern part of the state, there is a district that Massachusetts literally drives a bus up to the border every day, picks up students from that area, drives them to their comprehensive tech center where those kids get educated, and that's easier. And it's closer for those students to access that. But for us to build a regional high school in that area with a tech center would almost be impossible just because of the sparse nature of that geographic area, unless we're busing kids for like an hour and a half. I mean, that was just one challenge. That's just one challenge among many. Just to give you an idea.
Thank you. Thank you.
And feel free to add to that.
That's okay.
I just want to challenge too. If we're gonna say what we have now is firm and we can't touch it, we might not be doing what's best for the kids across the state. And so that was.
Recognize
we
it.
really
All
had
I'm saying is we have known CTEs and we have
known
deserts.
CTEs, we have known CTEs that have wait lists that are long enough to fill a second CTE in that area in certain programs. We don't have enough teachers. There's so many, we have areas that have CTEs that have very few programs but consider that to be comprehensive education for those kids. So CTE in itself isn't equitable either, which is another problem.
I want to kind of tap on to my previous response.
Yes.
Like I want to move back to the notion of what a superintendent's doing, what about the leadership aspect. One of my greatest reliefs in retiring is I don't have to make the snow day call. So I still get them. I'm still on an alert notice, but that's something that a superintendent does. So it'd be interesting to see what a superintendent would do to make the snow call when he's waking up in Virginia and has to make the call for the whole western half of the state. We have to have all those sorts of plans, legal things. I had a teacher who had inappropriate contact with a student. It took, I can't tell you how many hours of my life, days really. I think part of this whole thing, this notion that we're going to save money on administration by consolidating is a lack of understanding of what a superintendent does for a living. And I'd say the same for a principal at the school level. It's not, it'd be great if it was curriculum work. There's so much involved in it that is largely applying the law, sometimes consulting with attorneys because you're over your head. And is that possible in a 20,000 student district? Sure it is, but you distribute that. But there's so much that goes into the leadership aspect of it that it's going to be an important calculation to weigh the potential savings versus the lost productivity or the replacement cost of finding someone else to do that kind of work.
I appreciate the comments you're making about this. So I just have first of all, a comment and then a couple of very different questions. The comment being, is just about, we keep talking about the 5 districts. And really that's why the task force was created, was because nobody seemed to buy into the 5 school districts. So I just want to say that at the beginning, that was really never on the table. And people still continue to want to talk about it in terms of the 5 districts. And that's really one of the big motivating factors why the redistricting commission was created, was to say, let's try to create districts within this, boundary of numbers where it's practical to do that. I'll put that out there. Here's where I keep my mind keeps going, well, isn't it just the same thing? So when we talk about, a CISA with, it's mandated to have it, which has the power to implement all of these things across a broader geographic region. I guess help me understand what the difference between that is and a larger school district that has all of the same powers and scale that would come with a CISA.
Just to share my experience in Pennsylvania, so the way the intermediate unit works in Pennsylvania is that from a governance perspective, you have a board that is made up of one school board representative from each of the member districts. In my situation, we had 13 districts, so a member from each of the schools that participated, each of the districts participated. There's also an advisory board that would be the superintendents of each of those districts, similar to how we operate our career tech centers here at this point, governance wise.
No, there's all kinds of different governance for.
Right. So what is retained in going with the cooperative educational services model is that you still have local control. You still have your local school board, your SU or your SD before making that radical transformation. So we thought that was something that could be implemented without disrupting our current governance structures to give us more time to analyze those governance structures and to encourage voluntary merger.
And it's not something we're inventing, I'm sure you know that, but they're used in close to 40 states. They're extremely effective in rural states like Maine, New Hampshire, Montana, Wyoming. They save anywhere from 10 to 40% in buying, and from what we've heard, they improve outcomes. So we're not reinventing the wheel. I mean,
Totally
we are
understand that.
reinventing.
For me, it was just more that a larger district, and I think your answer is probably the answer, is that in one case, you're not changing the governance and creating a new sort of level of staffing to handle things at scale versus changing governance. Personally, I think we have a governance issue in Vermont and I think that costs money and kids. My other very different question was, you came and testified a lot to us about your experience within doing what you did in Pennsylvania. And I think one of the messages you were pretty clear about is that we got to make the case to the people who are going to have to accept it, and that takes time, and somebody out there with the sort of the ability to make that case, making the case over a sustained period. Yeah, I mean, can you talk a little about your experience doing that?
Yeah, like I said, I knew right out of the gates that I had a community that felt very strongly about it. All of our communities feel so strongly about their schools. I can't tell you how many retired teachers in Stratford have stopped me to plead the case. So there's this deep emotional attachment to our schools. In Erie, it was high schools. All of our business leaders, our mayor, everybody went to either one of the 4 city high schools before the suburbs were even built. And any talk of consolidating high schools was not going to be listened to. There were 10,000 seats in our high schools, and we maybe had 4,000 high school kids at that point. Even given that obvious need for consolidation, we hired an educational planning architect who did the GIS study that I described in detail before, who showed us where our current schools were, where the logical locations for comprehensive high schools would be, and what it would cost to actually make that change. And we didn't say much about the elementary schools. We kind of had an idea. There were a few that were really old and dilapidated that were probably going to have to close, but we wanted to make sure we built the case first before we took it on the streets. And we involved the community much the way we did for the task force. We brought them in, we gave a brief presentation, and then we had them work together to just, here's the data. You look at it, what do you think? So that by the time we announced the first round of school closures and consolidations, it was a foregone conclusion. It was like a yawn in the news. Whereas you'll have people out with picket signs and I've seen it go badly. And I've listened to the reports here about every time it comes up on a local ballot that we're going to close the elementary school, there's always a lot of disruption. So just by taking the time, we actually would go to these schools that were either going to be consolidated and changed or closed, and shockingly got applause at the end of the presentation. Because we took our time and because our data was bulletproof. I'm sure in Appendix E, we didn't include all research, but I will say it's not biased in the sense that we only picked that research that supported our position. I wanted to know for myself because I sat here and said, well, it seems with like 52 entities that we could probably run this state that only has the same number of kids as the city of Nashville with less governance and less administrative overhead. But let's look at the data. So in doing that deep dive through this process, my mind has changed. I think there still is savings to be brought up, but it's not in one blanket application. It's in these specific areas where we have too many schools in one pocket, like Montpelier, Rutland. We've got CTE deserts where we just don't have access to a CTE. And all these things are very regional. We have people challenge us to take the bus routes up over I can't remember which mountain it was, but it was one of the mountains in southern Vermont. And I've been on enough of those roads in a prior life as a salesman in Vermont that I know I want to turn sideways in some of those roads. So it's nuanced and it just is going to take more time. And that public rollout is, I think, vital to make it work.
I might ask for your thoughts on that. I mean, one of the concerns I have is that what we have now is the chickens coming home to roost in terms of declining enrollment. And declining enrollment does not seem to be stopping. And it seems to be moving faster than our ability to adapt to it. And so we keep talking about taking the time. And well, school districts are actually sort of having to do it on the fly because it's happening and we can't seem to stop it. And that's for reasons that have to do with everything from birth rates to housing. And so I grow concerned, and I'd like to have you sort of address my concerns that the process sort of envisioned with, moving slowly and all that isn't going to make us, we aren't going to be nimble enough to react. And we talk about schools closing and longer bus rides. I'm not sure that anything we do is going to stop that because we are growing more rural as populations move to cities and people are having fewer kids in rural areas.
If you're asking me we heard that at our first public meeting. I heard a line of people come and tell us that if you consolidate our schools, we're leaving. If you take choice, we're leaving. So yeah, I don't know that rushing the solution is going to stop the flow of people or the decline in population. I think that steady decline, it's a tough one to reckon with. But you've put together a big plan for a big transformation, and maybe it's just changing time. Like you've got some key pieces in place in the legislation. So maybe it just, we've delivered this report. Maybe it just means that we need to think differently about when's it ready for prime time? I said at the meeting, I think those of us who voted to put this forward agreed that it's not ready for prime time. It needs to be cooked more.
Can I respond, and not necessarily for the task force, but for myself. I'm frustrated with that comment, and I'll tell you why. We have no strategic plan for education in the state of Vermont. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what we're doing. We had a commission on the future of education that we conjured up, and then we basically left to die on the vine. It's frustrating to talk about when we have declining enrollment, what are we doing, when we can't solve the problem of governance. When we are still unsure if it's okay to be giving taxpayer subsidies to ski schools. Is it okay to have non-operating districts? We need to solve these problems before, in my opinion, we can have a foundation formula and before we can do what you're talking about, which is move quickly. We cannot. Full stop.
Any other questions? Oh, please.
I would just refer you and just remind me that on page 131 of Appendix E, the last item in the longer term says convenient to consider the public education system for visions beyond 10 years, beyond the useful life of its newest school buildings, and beyond the confines of our century-old structures and practices. That's the foundation. We talked about building a foundation at the first meeting. It's like, without building the foundation for the future first, we're just going to keep on renovating and changing things that have been in place here for, I don't know how many.
And making carve-outs for the people that come to the State House with a very clear plan. because something isn't working for them. And the more carve outs that we make, the more fractured system we have, the less good it is for kids, and we have to.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think that's some of the lesson of Act 46. And I was similarly in your shoes. My school board career began as the last year of the CVU school board before we became a unified district and merged voluntarily under Act 46. But that the carve out, like something that started, and I wasn't here in this body to have to vote for it. And I understand the difficulty and the complexity, but you know, that I think had a good intention and is the same thing we're wrestling with now. And then I think almost every one of us in the room agrees, we do have structural scale problems. They are uniquely different in different places, but we do have too few bodies in buildings, and we have two different systems of where we send our money in our bodies. And those are really complex challenges. I'm not sure, the governance piece, I think we keep like running head into it and then we back off, we run head into it, we back off. And I will say I listened to every single task force meeting and it just kept, I'd be yelling in my car, like, we're never going to be able to do any of this until we confront governance, until we have a common governance structure throughout the state. And I will put on my Chittenden County hat with a little frustration here. You talked about your district. You closed a school. I've had a, next door neighbor seat to Essex, and watching them, they went through a voluntary merger in Act 46. They now, because of their structure, the school board and the superintendent can make educationally sound decisions for their community that are still difficult and unpopular. And that includes moving kids in grades. That includes closing schools, as Essex just did. My district is talking about potential reconfiguration. And the governance allows for that. And it requires leadership too. They have strong superintendent and district board leadership that helps do that. But it felt to me that some of our challenges in what we've passed in Act 73 and the things you ran in and that we're still talking about here are because we haven't fundamentally addressed that governance. And we quickly fall into carve outs and this is different and that needs to be different. And things will look different, but until we can agree on a common governance structure, it feels like we just keep running into the same wall.
Yeah, and that's local. Right. And we value local.
Yep.
And nobody wants to give it up without understanding that it will be better for their kids. And until we have that information, they won't like it, but it will be better for our kids.
Let me make one closing remark and then I promise I'll stop talking. Is that okay, chairs?
Sure.
Thank you. Because I think I don't know, I get the feeling we might be wrapping
Yes,
up, but I think as legislators, we all have the opportunity right now to sort of like look in the mirror also. Every time we pass a law, it costs money. Every time we require legislation, including Act 73, it costs money, it costs time, it costs man and women and people power. If I would like to direct you to the cost driver portion of the study, which talks about not only, passing PCB legislation costs money and time and effort, but the fact that we then place it on an understaffed or under-resourced body to do the work, right? That actually costs money. One of our cost drivers is the Agency of Education's lack of ability to see through the legislation that we pass, whether it be proficiency-based grading or special education or PCB, you name it. That is a cost driver, and it's not something that I thought about until we made it, explicit in our report. But it's something that we all need to be thinking about when we pass a bill.
Senators, representatives? Great. I think that the tone of the conversation today is typical of what we're going to be going through as we really try to wrestle with a lot of this. But you guys provided the information or the proposal to us that we needed to debate, and really appreciate the effort you put in. And Jay, always appreciate your very candid commentary.
And I must thank you for the hard questions, because if we're not willing to have the hard conversations, then we won't be able to make things better. So apologies if I came off strong. I know I was bearing my soul a little bit here, but I think we're talking about something that's important to every single one of us and every single family in Vermont. So really appreciate the difficult conversation and appreciate that you're going to have.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. We stand adjourned.